Good evening, everyone, right up there. Thank you for joining us tonight. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Happy National Coming Out Day. I'm Michael David Murphy. I'm the Digital Director of Atlanta Celebrates Photography. We're grateful to be collaborating tonight with our friends at Emory University's Department of Film and Media in bringing Philadelphia-based photographer and mixed media artist John Singletary to you. We want to thank Fulton County Arts Council for their support of the ACP lecture series. And as always, we thank our generous friends at MailChimp. We're currently in the middle of our 23rd season of the festival, which runs through October and a little bit into November and beyond. If Atlanta Celebrates Photography is new to you, please check out acpinfo.org or ACP Fest on social media, which will direct you to our digital festival guide and our iPhone app, which lists more than 150 photo-based events and exhibitions around the Atlanta metro area right now. With that, I'd like to pass the baton to Jason Francisco, Associate Professor in the Film and Media Department at Emory University. And let me see, I think I have to unpin myself and pin him. Let's see, there we go, Jason.
Thanks, Michael. Am I live?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good, yeah. Thank you, Michael, and everybody at ACP Bex and the whole crew over there. We're really happy to be collaborating with you again this year as part of the regular speaker series that we do at Emory in the Film and Media Department in and on and around photography. Before we get started, on that note, I'd like to share with you quickly our coming speaker. And yes, I hope you can all see. Rachel Fine-Smolinski will be our next speaker, coming on November 8th, Monday evening at 7 p.m. And following that will be David Barba, who will be coming on the 22nd of November. These events are free and open to the public. They are sponsored by the Film and Media Department, but not only for Emory students and faculty and community. Everybody is welcome to come. And I hope that you'll all join us from everywhere that you are now. And with that, I'd like to welcome tonight's guest, my friend and photographer, John Singletary, joining us from Philadelphia. As Michael said, I'm very, very happy that John will be joining us today. I think this may be one of the first times that Atlanta-based audiences will see John's work. John, to just introduce him briefly, John studied photography at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and really has become quite well known to a lot of the art and photo community in and around Philadelphia. His work is in the collections of the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Center for Fine Art Photography. He's shown at the Pennsylvania State Museum, at the Tripp Gallery, the James Oliver Gallery, at the Saul Mednick Gallery at the University of the Arts, also at the Delaware Contemporary. And you may have come across his work in any number of reviews or interviews, especially a feature that WHYY in Philadelphia did about his work. You'll find that John is a great example of what I think of as the sort of natural restlessness of photography as a medium. Many people who have been in classes with me or other events will know that I often say that photography is a medium that's at the center of contemporary art, but it has no center itself. And John's work, as you'll see, combines not only remarkably inventive and ambitious uses of photo technologies, but also reaches across to performance studies, to dance, to ethnography, to mythology. And I think you'll find it fascinating. So John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. And thank you to Michael and Bex as well. Greetings, thank you, welcome to everyone out there on Zoom. And it's an honor to be here and have the opportunity to share my work with you. I'd like to also thank Harris Fogel, Billy Howard, and everyone over at ACP for inviting me here to speak tonight. It is truly an honor. So I'm a fine art photographer, multimedia digital artist, as well as a drastically out of practice musician, and I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is quite a unique city. If anyone's seen the David Lynch film Eraserhead, which was, to my understanding, based on his time in Philadelphia studying at the Academy, it can be a bit like that. However, it's also a town that I'm really proud to be from. There's a thriving art community, and I feel very supported here. So in this talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of my ongoing projects entitled Anahata, my journey through life from an artistic standpoint, which includes some of my influences, the process of making certain work, and I will also try to touch on the nature of art and its purpose in society, which I suppose is a perfectly valid topic, and it's only unfair insofar as you can expect me to answer it with any degree of authority or empirical truth. Now, with that, give me a second to share my screen here with you guys. All right. Never get used to this Zoom thing, but anyways, these are a couple images from Anahata, which is a large-scale project in which really marked a shift in my career from a photographer in the most traditional sense of that word to assuming a more directorial role in producing work. Now, when Jason asked me to speak, he made it clear he was inviting both photographers in that traditional sense and also artists who use photography as an integral part of their process. I think this project really marked that shift for me from the former to the latter category. I started this whole affair of making things as a musician. Started playing guitar when I was about 13 and played in bands through high school, as well as recording with a 13-piece project called La Brea, which was heavily influenced by bands like Do Make Say Think, Godspeed You Black Emperor, some modern classical music like Arvo Part, Philip Glass, as well as a lot of stuff that was coming out of Chicago in the early 2000s. Bands like Tortoise, Papa M, Shellac, Rex, and many others. My mother is an art historian, and I've had the wonderful fortune to travel through most of Europe and see a range of amazing art and architecture. However, I didn't really gravitate towards photography over other forms like painting or sculpture. And in fact, it was really the photographs made by musicians that I admire that really inspired my interest in the medium. Now, these are some images by Godspeed, and in one sense, they are naive photography. However, in another, they're sophisticated contemporary photographs that just happen to exist outside of the canon of quote unquote contemporary art. There's something about the rawness and the apocalyptic vision of these pictures that that really resonated with me. And to be totally candid with you guys, I think half of the reason that I picked up a camera in the first place was just the notion that it would be cool to be able to create my own album artwork, which is something I did, but obviously it spun off into a much bigger and larger endeavor in my life. So these are manipulated Polaroids by Chicago-based musician Tim Rutilli of the band Red Red Meat and later Caliphone. He's probably my favorite lyricist of all time. And there's something I find incredibly compelling about the sort of odd perspective he's able to capture in this work. And although it is not technical, there's something truly magical for me in these photographs, and they had an impact, you know, on my early development. I think it's also worth noting that he directed an acclaimed feature-length film entitled All of My Friends Are Funeral Singers, which is really quite funny in a dark humor sort of way. So the first fine art photographer, quote unquote, that I looked at was Joseph Kadelka. And I happened to stumble across one of his books called Chaos when I was in Paris. And I just found it riveting and so compelling that I just had to buy it. I believe these are post-war photographs from Eastern Europe, but Kadelka's career is long and complicated, and my copy of this book is in French. So to be entirely honest with you, I do not know the whole story. However, much of this work was created with a unique panoramic camera. And it's also worth noting that he comes from the long and celebrated tradition of Magnum photographers. These images by Irving Penn are absolutely pivotal in my development. Penn was both a prolific fine art photographer as well as an editorial photographer. I developed a sense of how to print by analyzing both Penn and Kadelka's sort of high contrast imagery that demonstrates masterful control over both the highlights and the shadows. And honestly, I am still inclined to print this way most of the time. This is a pig head, part of two that I photographed back in probably 2014, I would say. And it's actually a direct homage to Penn in that I consciously emulated his style of printing, which is, you know, not something that I do in my other work, but it was an interesting exercise. So this is some of my other early 4x5 work, which are studies of natural forms, really. My first formal training in photography was at the Community College of Philadelphia under Michael Joniak and Jeff Birkin. These teachers were pivotal for me in that they demonstrated the importance of having sharp tools, of mastering one's craft before forming lofty ideas about art. Many people may not agree about this in the arena of contemporary photography these days. However, I find integrity and craftsmanship in one's work to be essential. I was a student of traditional 4x5 cameras, I mentioned, Ansel Adams' zone system. I formulated my own developers from raw chemistry, and the sense of sort of alchemical magic in the darkroom was really essential. And I really don't think that the digital would have hooked me in the same way when I was younger. This said, most of the things that I do these days have an element of digital, and I am in no way a purist when it comes to this stuff. My best piece of advice for students of photography or other creative disciplines is to find a mentor, to find someone who you respect, approach them with humility, and see if they're open to having an apprenticeship type relationship. This made all the difference for me in my life, and that person was Richard Kagan. I started working for Richard when I was about 22, and he taught me about 75% of what I know about being an artist on a day in and day out basis. In addition to being an outstanding photographer and woodworker, he is an example of someone who has led an extraordinary life of unusual integrity and wisdom. This photograph is by David Lieb, who is one of Richard's teachers. And David's work is important to me in the way that he uses light, both practically and metaphorically. And this is something I'm going to return to when discussing my work, but I find these images to be somewhat wonderful and just really compelling. I feel like when you boil it down, there are essentially two ways of approaching making images. And the first is going out into the world and hunting for pictures. Someone like David Graham is a perfect example of this. However, this requires a deft eye, and it is something that I am okay at, and okay being the operative word here, so I will just leave it at that. In order to speak about what I'm doing now, I need to mention both Helmut Newton and Guy Bourdin as crucial influences on me. When I started seeing these people who were primarily fashion photographers, it became obvious that the studio offered me an opportunity to create images fully formed from my imagination, which for me is a lot more interesting and valuable to point the camera internally at my own psyche and not at the world around me. And I'm not saying that wonderful images can't be made that way. I am just saying that I'm not so inclined. These are some more photographs of mine that were directly influenced by both Newton and Bourdin. And they served as kind of a pivotal bridge for me in these two approaches. And this is really where I became more interested in the notion of constructing images rather than taking pictures, if you will. And I don't like that term anyway to begin with, but you make a photograph, you don't take a photograph. But either way, semantics aside, these are just a few of my influences confined to what we'll say is lens-based art. However, I'm influenced by everything from painting and sculpture, films, music, even lowbrow forms of art like street art and punk rock. I actually feel like punk rock, all music aside, but rather the ethos has been very important and influential on the way I conceive of making work, as it affords a sense of freedom to do whatever you want in a creative context, to work around one's seeming constraints and to just go all out with things. Following one's inner drive, regardless of what challenges you may face, I think is critically important. This is, think about the saying, garbage in, garbage out. So in a society that will gladly force feed you garbage, I think it's really important to find things that are meaningful. And this takes a degree of effort, however, it is certainly worth it. Now, moving along here, I'm going to talk about Anahata, which is the major focus of this lecture. This is a still image entitled Clarice. However, I'm going to show you this detail video made by a friend of mine, John Thornton. Anahata was a project I started a number of years ago. In a lot of ways, this work started as a massive experiment, and to be honest, a testament to the importance of following one's creative impulses, regardless of how empirically ridiculous they may seem at the time. Doing this without too much regard for the notion of failure is critical. I mean, honestly, we fail at things all the time if we're, going to be real about it. There was a tremendous sense of play in this entire process, and I think that that's something to be regarded as special. Now, this is not to say that I did not believe in the idea, as I was already a serious artist. I'd been producing bodies of work, exhibiting, and really just doing this for quite some time. However, undertaking a project of this scope was a little daunting and intimidating, to be modest about it. Anahata is a photography-based multimedia installation in which I opted to use OLED electronic canvases as a means of display. This was also my first exploration into installation art. I mentioned I come from a background that's dedicated to the fine print as an object. However, with this project, I let myself throw any notions of traditionalism out the window and considered what are the most appropriate tools at my disposal to create a vision. If you aren't familiar, OLED is a certain kind of display technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. These images are the result of a highly collaborative process among dancers, theater performers, choreographers, costume designers, makeup artists, and others. The shooting process was heavily influenced by a cinematic approach in which I could think of myself as more of a director as opposed to a run and gun type photographer. It was a matter really of employing all of my skills across different areas and doing this in the service of executing a picture. The work was shot in a very unusual studio. It was all very elaborate and involved. And, you know, even if that's the only thing that you want to say about it. Anahata is a Sanskrit word that translates to unhurt or unbroken, corresponds to the energy of the heart, and also refers to the unstruck sound and resonance with the celestial realm. The imagery is quite dreamlike, and I was very influenced by mythology, but not a singular mythos, but more the idea of myth and storytelling and also ritual. It's a matter of looking at these phenomena and then the way they function as a means of understanding ourselves as a species, as individuals, and collectively as a society. These are valuable tools for constructing meaning from experience. It is also about human relationships and our innate connection to something greater than ourselves, to something vast and expansive, if you will. And I say this from the most secular and non-religious perspective. I think grace is a very appropriate word, and the notion that at the heart of things, we're all a lot more similar than we are different. So before going any further about meanings and such issues, I'd like to take a little time and talk about the process of how this work was made. And first, I'd like to thank each and every member of the team that opted to join me in this process. I feel incredibly lucky and fortunate to have had such a wonderful, enthusiastic, and talented group of people around me, and I'm deeply grateful for their belief and support of my vision. This project, I think, began with a mix of feelings, premonitions, and ideas for imagery, and a trust in this. However, it was simply too early to understand the form it would ultimately take. For me, sometimes over-intellectualizing a project before it begins is potentially detrimental to forming an organic dialogue with my work. And there are a lot of things that I really just don't want to know too early on. Personally, I feel like making art is a fluid and experiential process that's not really about words. This said, some people can start a body of work with a thesis and then support and punctuate their ideas in visual form, which is a perfectly valid way to execute a project. However, personally, I tend to start from a place of questioning and a sense of trust in what I'm doing. This said, I had a lot of sketches for certain types of imagery, and so commenced the process of assembling a team of people to work with, which included models who were primarily dance students from the University of the Arts here in Philadelphia, many of whom have gone on to dance for some wonderful companies and have great careers themselves. And also my costume designer, Kate, who is in many respects the co-author of some of these photographs. My crew also included makeup artists, choreographers, set technicians, and assistants. And we set about building sort of a makeshift studio to execute this idea. And the studio was the absolute epitome of this kind of DIY ethos that I was referencing earlier. And I had to allow myself to try something that was objectively a little unusual and go down a rabbit hole of my own making, if you will. I rented a room in a large Victorian style home that was in a perpetual state of disrepair in the Germantown area of Philadelphia. It was totally customized and you could say raw, to put it nicely. My friend and collaborator, Andre Kuyada, and I used to joke that the place was held together by zip ties, and this is really not far from the truth. My assistants and I stapled huge panels of velvet to the walls and the floor to create a sort of black box type of environment. Missed my slide, so that's kind of what I was talking about there. And we introduced floods of ambient UV light, bolted traditional strobes on a radio trigger system to the walls, and sensitized the models with body paint to pursue this pseudo bioluminescence and allow the models to become light sources in and of themselves. And the result of this is one of the most unique shooting experiences that I have ever been a part of. It was a tangled mess of wires and bodies and various states of undress. And, you know, I really think that out of the gate, it was so weird that this worked in our favor, as it afforded a sense of total freedom to not be self-conscious or hung up, and I think offered the models a sense of permission to embody a character completely in a way that a traditional studio setting might not have. We would collectively spend upwards to 14 or 16 hours in this essentially a sensory deprivation chamber, practicing a bastardized form of studio photography. And this experience was exhilarating, intense, and completely exhausting. Sometimes I would honestly spend days trying to recover my physical strength after shoots. Collaboration and working as the leader of this project was essential to me for a number of reasons. Most obviously, this is not something that one can pursue as a lone artist, which is how I think a lot of photographers conceive of what they're doing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this approach. I'm certain that the process has taught me an incredible amount about any number of things. However, maybe least of all about photography or art. We approached each of the pieces as a collective in which I had a very clear and unified vision for narrative and choreography. However, I am not this kind of pseudo genius overbearing type. I think that it is important to bring my ideas to my team and collaborators and allow them to interject their own forms of unique expression in the work. And I'm very encouraging of this. To bring a sketch of something to Kate, my costume designer, and give her the space to develop a fully formed character that might be slightly different than what I initially envisioned, and then see that character embodied by a dancer who runs through my choreography, interpreting it with his or her own body, is really an incredible experience. So in many ways, these ideas are synthesized through a number of iterations and filters that eventually lead to the final work. Every time we shoot, it's a bit of a delicate tightrope act, so to speak, in which I'm responsible for guiding my crew, maintaining a sense of balance and a clear unified vision, although within that framework, allowing each artist to contribute their own ideas. And this is something that takes an incredible degree of trust. It takes knowing when to assert myself in the service of an idea, and it also takes knowing when to pull back to realize I do not know, that magic is unfolding around me, and the best thing that I can do is simply to get out of the way. I will not lie and say that this is not a nerve-wracking activity at times. However, to get a group of people together working in flow state and communicating on a level that transcends words is a really rare and exhilarating experience. Finally, about collaboration, I feel that a sense of humility and reverence for my crew is essential, because without their belief in my vision and willingness to go to great lengths to execute it, I would simply be a person with a lot of ideas that exist only within my imagination. I feel like a lot of photographers approach the idea of working with models from the mindset that they're giving the model a quote unquote opportunity to work with them. However, for me, it's the complete opposite. They're giving me an opportunity to photograph them and to realize my dreams. Now, to talk about the installation and post-production area of this, but I'd like to pause for a second to show you this, this 1 minute time-lapse video that we shot over about 4 days of installing my most recent show at the Delaware Contemporary, which was, I think it was very close to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's all a very involved process. There's a lot of power tooling and such, but that's really not my specialty. So on the post-production end of things and exhibition design, we wanted to create an environment that was charged with the same sense of energy and stillness one might feel when entering a sanctuary, monastery, or cathedral. A sense of meditative quiet that immerses the senses completely with visual imagery, music, and dance. Now, given the intensity of the shooting experience, I felt that an exhibition of traditional prints would have been very anticlimactic. Within this contextual framework, the notion of light is quite important and can be viewed symbolically as a kind of energy, power, and essence. It is exchanged, transmitted, weaponized, and shared. This internal luminance is the very fabric of our collective being and holds us together in this sort of delicate dance of interconnectedness. For these reasons, presenting imagery on OLED panels seemed very appropriate. And in case you are not familiar, OLED is a unique type of display technology that was actually invented by Eastman Kodak in the mid-'80s. However, they didn't really know what to do with it. And when they were in the process of folding, they passed the patent along to LG Electronics, who really ran with it and developed something quite incredible. And for fine art purposes, this wonderful display technology, as it has a very gentle and smooth tonality that is in many ways reminiscent of a traditional platinum palladium print or a carbon arc lamp projection. These individual panels were synchronized with computer technology to create a time display system in which the works would emerge from darkness and recede like apparitions. And the goal was really to form a living and breathing environment. Now, in approaching, apologies, I'm having trouble with this slide. Anyway, in approaching the idea of exhibition, my friend David Markham and I were interested in the idea of creating something immersive and alive, experience that engages all of the senses, which, as I mentioned, includes music. I worked with one of my closest friends, Matt Hollenberg, who's one of the most incredibly gifted musicians that I have ever met. And Matt plays for the renowned progressive jazz composer, John Zorn, in addition to his own band, Cleric, which is quite incredible. Matt and I worked together over several sessions in Brooklyn on composing and recording a 30-minute exhibition score that plays on loop in the gallery space during exhibitions. For me, one of the crucial distinctions between an installation and an installation that is a series of prints is that a print offers a window into a world, while an installation affords the freedom to create that world. Additionally, dancer Amber Malmstead and I discussed the idea of incorporating a live dance performance into openings and special events. It's sort of this slow costumed choreography that unfolds over time. And it's something that I think audiences really enjoy, and it adds to a sort of sense of celebration or spectacle in these contexts. I'm really very populist in my way about thinking of art, and I feel like this worked to dissolve the notion that appreciating art requires some sort of formal or academic training, which I do not believe to be true. Now, on a more conceptual level, you may be wondering what this is about and why anyone would take the time, which I suppose is a fair question and a requisite part of this lecture. Anahata is a series of images and video pieces that can be interpreted in a number of ways that I feel are also true to my intention. I'll start by saying that I'm a progressive in terms of political affiliation. I wholeheartedly support the BLM movement, the LGBTQ community, the Me Too movement, and so on. Simply put, I believe in individual liberty, equality, and freedom for everyone, period. It is a sense of humanism that is really at the core of this work. On its most essential level, it is about human relationships and our connection to a sense of divinity that is boundless. It's about the inherent and undeniable sanctity of each member of the human species that transcends language or words. It's about a sense of awe, wonder, and belonging. I feel that each individual, regardless of race, ethnic background, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, and so on, is fundamentally connected to an essence or vitality that we are all able to access. Unfortunately, as society changes and stratifies, we seem to be creating more labels and boxes that intend to define the very notion of identity. On one hand, these sorts of categorical distinctions are necessary as a descriptive tool. However, I am not discussing semantics. Rather, this type of thinking can be dangerous in that it can give rise to a sense of othering and tribalistic ideologies, such as racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and other more insidious and divisive agendas. Anahata is about conveying a sense of harmony within the human organism and society as a whole. When thinking about the notion of a shared humanity, I feel like there is a plane or place that we can all access or draw upon, the collective unconscious in Jungian terms, and this serves as a common point of origin for all unified visual sensibilities that exist or will exist outside of the constraints of time as we perceive it on a day in and day out basis. In life, we all have at least a couple of these fleeting yet eternal moments in which we're able to pull back the curtain, if you will, to become something more than human, to be awestruck by a natural complexity that is beyond our ability to comprehend, and to have a reverence for this, to experience fully, be it through music, dance, prayer, making love, making art, or through stillness. The notion of ceremony, ritual, and myth are integral aspects of this. And since the dawn of humanity, we have been drawn to mythos as a means of explaining the intellectually inexplicable and mysterious aspects of existence. Myth has and continues to serve as an essential framework for our understanding of experiences in life that are simultaneously terrifying and beautiful. With this work, I sought to illustrate what this looks like for me in a personal way. Now, on another level, these pictures are also about human relationships, but in a much less abstract sense of the word. These could be romantic, familial, platonic, or otherwise. When I conceive of a piece, I have a very definite idea about its narrative quality. This is sometimes drawn from my own personal experiences or the experiences of others. People love to ride these loud, unmuffled machines over here. Sorry about that. These are sometimes drawn from my own personal experiences or the experiences of others I have encountered and have formed a bond with on some level. However, there is always an underlying question or curiosity that I'm trying to work out. In some ways, the sense of merging of the characters within the imagery can be viewed as symbolic of our interactions as we pass through life. The way that we connect, intertwine our very being, and share ourselves with one another. I believe the longing to find connection in a world that can often feel alienating and cold is a primal impulse, that this is something that we're hardwired to do. However, the duality of this connection is also the inevitability of loss. And it is my belief that if one has the courage to dive fully into this grief, they may find that these special and rare individuals have left an indelible and permanent mark on our psyches. There's always a story that I'm trying to tell in these works. However, I resist the need to be heavy-handed and impose my own interpretations or meanings on the viewer. I think it's essential to allow every person to find their own unique experiences and stories within these pictures. Many times I'm pleasantly amazed at the interpretations of others, and in doing so, they're able to show me things about my work of which I was not aware, but are resonant. And forming this kind of dialogue with one's own creations is something that I can find to be quite fascinating. I was once asked, what questions do you hope to answer with these pictures? And I suppose from a certain perspective, this is a fair question. However, I do not consider it my responsibility to answer questions, as I'm not some sort of mystic. Rather, I see the role of my work to be one of asking questions, for the viewer to have an experience that is true and intense. When this happens, one can't help but synthesize raw emotion into language and intellectual curiosity. The purpose is one of providing a space for reflection and not dialectical explanation. It seems that I start a project with a set of questions, and upon completion, I am not left with answers, rather a more complicated set of questions. The United States has never in my lifetime been this polarized along ideological lines. And in many ways, I feel that we live in a post-truth society. Now, what I mean by this is when members of our government are legitimately taking the Senate floor to discuss matters as absurd as Jewish laser beams from space, one can't help but feel that something is deeply and alarmingly wrong. One might be inclined to view the pursuit of making art as a frivolous luxury. And on some level, I can see this to be true. However, I will also offer the counter argument that art is an essential part of a thriving society. It is not accidental that when most totalitarian regimes rise to power, artists are among the first to be silenced. This just happened in Afghanistan when the Taliban took power. They banned all music, and as we speak, musicians over there are fearing for their very lives. In many ways, I don't think that I felt as alone and cordoned off in my life as certain times over these past 18 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. The world has grown increasingly menacing and confusing. We're destroying what little hope we have for the planet. And I'm led to consider the words of the painter Brian Geisen that, quote, "Man is a bad animal," with a much higher degree of seriousness. This said, it is absolutely pivotal that we retain the ability to love, to create, and to dream. It is essential that we are reminded through the transcendence of creation that imagination and inspiration are forces that are very much alive, that art and science and politics are not so different, for it is that common spark that allows us to conceive of a better and more harmonious society. Now, in closing, as this lecture is presented in collaboration with the Emory University Department of Film and Media, I would like to take a moment to address the student population, both at Emory and elsewhere. First, if you have the intellect to get into a school as highly regarded as Emory and you choose to study art for the right reasons, I commend you, because there are much easier things one can do with their lives. There are pursuits that will afford you a much higher degree of freedom and comfort in this world, at least by most people's standards. This is a difficult path, mostly because there is no real path. You're kind of left in the woods to figure it out yourself. However, you get to decide what is important and what is not. You get to decide what is truly worth considering. As my mentor and friend Richard put it about being an artist, quote, "I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, yet I would not trade it for the world." I'm sorry to say that there is no point of arrival, no point in which you have mastered something so completely. There is, however, a point at which some stop choosing to learn. Some stop choosing to be curious, to stop climbing and reaching for that next plateau. The truth is, be it music or science, physics or art, a single human can only ever know about 1% of something so vast. I will argue that this is one of the reasons that art is important and meaningful. Richard Avedon died in his 80s while directing photographs from a hospital bed. I would also say that in pursuing this practice, you have afforded yourself an invaluable tool for processing the traumas and challenges of life and dealing with this stuff with a degree of integrity and introspection. I feel compelled to talk about something that I've never heard discussed in these type situations, and honestly, this baffles me. And it may be because it lacks some of the instant appeal of other topics. However, I feel a responsibility as a living artist to debunk the pop culture myth that great art or music is somehow inherently born of suffering, or that great artists are tortured and misunderstood geniuses. I think this is insane and it's incredibly destructive. Sure, art can be a pivotal and cathartic force for processing loss, disillusionment, angst, and any other sort of uncomfortable emotions. However, suffering is not requisite, nor is it in your best interest to create your own. This way of thinking is perpetuated and glamorized by the constantly spinning media machine that lacks anything resembling compassion, reinforced by the need to sell you things. Sure, I will argue that many brilliant works have been created by people who faced problems that proved ultimately insurmountable for them. However, this is not to be romanticized. The fetishization that we have as a society with the self-destructive impulse is sick, if not sociopathic. As an artist, your job is to inspire and to be inspiring, and I will offer the argument that misery is not inspiring. Your job is simply to remain curious and to remain hungry. Have a thick skin for criticism because you're going to get a lot of it. Treat the studio as if it was sacred, because this is true, it is. The word studio practice is called practice for a reason, because it needs to be cultivated. This practice takes a certain discipline, a militant nature within oneself that requires drive, awareness, and compassion. This is a marathon and not a sprint. And it's fine to do a few good things. However, to sustain, endure, and to remain open enough to seek joy in the process of creating without attachment to the outcome, this is really the key. To constantly ask the question, how can I be better? Show your work whenever you can, because work belongs on walls and not in boxes. I suggest the word feedback is not an incidental term, as just as I can hold a guitar up to an amplifier and it feeds back, the energy grows and builds. First, one must inspire themselves, then you can inspire others. And above that, there is a level at which the things you create and the people you inspire come back to inspire you, completing the circle, closing that feedback loop that reverberates endlessly. I think this is an amazing thing to think about. However, in my personal experience, this is something I have only witnessed rarely in others and with great admiration. Thank you.
Excellent, John. Let me, this is Michael with ACP again. I'm a disembodied voice, and let me remove you off the spotlight panel and see if we can get Jason back here and have a few questions. Jason, before I'm sure you have some questions prepared, but if I could kind of lob the first. Thank you, John. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the care and attention with which you put that together. It was great to get an introduction to your work. I was really interested by what you were saying specifically about this role of questions and answers and going through the process of making something and arriving with maybe fewer answers than you might expect. Can you talk just briefly, maybe in regards to one of the pieces of what those initial questions were that spurred you to create these pieces?
Well, thank you for the wonderful feedback, and it's a pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed doing this. They were, I think it's hard to put this stuff into words, but they were more kind of deeply existential questions, if you will, about kind of just the fabric of reality and the nature of existence, and things that I found very hard to articulate or intellectualize. And as I said, this work did start as a large experiment, and I wasn't exactly sure where it would go. So it was kind of it was a mixture of a lot of things.
Gotcha. Jason, you want to take these a little bit further? We are keeping our eye on the chat. If any of the folks listening, watching have questions, feel free to drop them there. We'll try and leaven them in as we go through here. Thanks, Jason.
Sure. Yeah. Please do tell us about the incoming questions that are as they appear. John, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
And I do have many thoughts in mind, many questions. Like Michael, I was struck by your framing of the artist's work as the work of questioning rather than answering. And something that passed through my mind as you were speaking about that was a distinction that I think I know from other parts of the social sciences, other parts of the university, where they speak about the difference between what they call tame and wicked problems, meaning, and if I understand this distinction, what they mean by this in sociology, for example, is a tame problem is a problem which, when you come up with the answers, makes the problem go away. And a wicked problem is a problem whose answers reveal the problem more fully. And
I don't know about this.
Yeah, and it strikes me that when we talk about these kinds of problems, that there are certain obvious kinds of examples, like, I don't know, global warming or international trade, or but also the work of an artist in a studio in collaboration with other artists is an excellent example, I think, on a different level of the same kind of situation. I wanted to ask, I have several things I'd like to ask you. I don't know if there's time to ask everything, but one of the first things that struck me in your presentation, you didn't use this word, but the word utopia or utopic kept returning to my thinking as I listened to your presentation. I had the distinct feeling that this drive or this ambition that you have has something to do with an opportunity to give image to some kind of utopic inclination. And in a sense, what you've created is this remarkable vision of humanity, which defies easy categorization. We are looking at groups of people that are not undifferentiated. We're looking at individual people that don't have distinct physical boundaries between each other, much less psychic boundaries or cultural boundaries. There's a kind of fluidity that encompasses everything, and yet it seems to be issued by light that, as you said, apparently comes from within the figures themselves. Is utopic thinking something that, or the utopic obligation or mandate, or I don't know, imperative? Are these things that have been sitting inside you as you worked?
Well, I've never actually really thought about the word utopic specifically. However, I wouldn't reject this as being incorrect. I feel like we're, as a species, we're going through some really dark times, politically, with the pandemic and everything that's going on. And, and I thought this, before 2020. So I feel like that, I feel like there's a humanism at the core of this, and a sense that that we can transcend the way things are right now, that there is hope for a better and more complete society, and that it may be naive, but maybe we can eliminate our fear of one another, and this kind of knee-jerk impulse to reject something out of hand because it simply doesn't correspond to our ideology. And one thing that's alarming to me is that nuance is being very much removed from thinking. It's very polar, it's very black and white in certain areas, and I'm trying to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised by the politics in your presentation, because when I look at the work, I'm not against the inclusion of politics in a presentation like this, but when I look at the work that you're doing, it looks to me like work that in a sense belongs to a non-political appeal to audiences. In other words, you don't have to be a member of this party, that group, you don't have to have a certain kind of identitarian status for yourself in order to find a place in this work. And I think that really has to do with the quality of wonder and just awe, this or curiosity, this quality of simple curiosity that's given play in this work. Okay, so anyway, there's something else that I'd like to ask you also, which is the kind of object specificity of this work that you're doing. You've shown us images, still images, and video work. Is this kind of work something that people need to see in person?
Oh,
to understand, or what is it that we cannot grasp about this work as you're representing it to us, or maybe twice over representing it? You've created a photograph of a photograph, a video of a photograph, which is now being fed through a Zoom connection and so forth. But what is it that we don't, what's the aspect of the experience that we don't quite grasp if we're not there in person?
Well, yeah, you've said a number of things that I think are very insightful. But just to comment on the last thing first, I feel like I have a lot of trouble or challenges, presenting this work in a virtual sort of format, be it on a website or any other thing, because it's really about the sense of being in that space, in that room, and it's all a bit, with installation art, it's really about it's about immediate experience, and it's about the charge in that room, and that's just something that I can't convey through this format or any other, really. And just to touch briefly on what you're saying, I don't think the work is overtly political. However, I am a very political person. My goal was not to make political art, quote unquote. However, when you think about the larger notion of humanity and all of these sorts of questions, the structures of politics are really an important part of that.
Mhm, mhm.
Jason, I have a question from the audience that I'd like to field if possible.
Sure.
Let's see, it's coming in from Pierce Mansfield into the chat. And the question is to John, what is your advice for keeping confidence throughout a project, no matter the circumstances?
Good question.
Oh man. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it just boils down to tenacity, to the fact that like you're gonna wake up and do this. And as I said earlier, I mean, not having an attachment to the notion of failure or success on a tangible level while you're making the stuff. I found that keeping those sorts of things in mind has been at certain points really detrimental in my practice. So it's a matter of switching between sort of like the right and left brain and doing this like really quickly in some sort of sense. And it just takes drive, and it takes a willingness to fail.
There's another question that's coming in here from the chat. Joel Silverman is asking about your connection to punk rock. He says that you talked about your punk rock influence, and so much of your work embodies a raw spirit of experimentation and a do-it-yourself ethos. Is the spirit of loving to break rules and trying something new the secret to why your work gets wide reception? Or does it ever hold you back because people don't know what little box to put you in as an artist?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, I guess talking about punk rock, I mean, I feel like punk is like, the music is really, I happen to like the music, but like that's kind of incidental to more of like the core fundament, the core idea that I think really affords one the freedom to try something, that there are no obstacles, and only obstacles that you create. And like I could have told you that I shot that stuff in $1,000 an hour studio in New York City, and everyone here would have believed me probably, but like that wasn't the case. So we had to work with what we had around. And I think that in many ways it would have been easy to consider that this is impossible with the limited bit of equipment and resources that I have. So, that's really where that comes in. And And yeah, it's the uniqueness of my work, I think, has been both a blessing and a curse in that, yeah, people really don't know what kind of box to put me in, so to speak. And, I'm not really sure that I belong in the context of photography, to be quite honest with you. However,
What do you mean by that?
well, just that I feel like I'm, it's not straight photography. It's not something that's easily understood or easily digestible. So it's it can be really tricky. As you said, I'm much more of an artist that happens to use photography more than I am a photographer at this point.
Yeah. How important is it to be correctly labeled?
It's only important in so far as thinking about who's going to be receptive to my work on a certain way, and what types of questions people are going to have about it, and these sorts of things. But I mean, really, it's not all that important. I really just want people to appreciate the work.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I find what you're doing to be very accessible artistically. I don't think that you're I mean, the performative nature of the work is brilliant, and the synthetic approach towards theater or dance, and music. I mean, there's a great deal of one can see how your sense of the stage has morphed from the realm of sound to the realm of sight, and in looking at the work. And I think that the kind of the spirituality of the work, or the kind of quasi spirituality, and I know you're not inclined to put spiritual language to this, although you did make references to things like the divine from time to time, but there is this urge that seems to be inside of your work to towards, as you call it, existential questions, or transcendent questions, or an effort to find an image for that which is unbroken, or encompassing, or interconnected. And these are all very, I think, spiritual concerns, and those are very universal things that so on that level, I find the work that you're doing to be very accessible.
Well, I mean, I think that everyone has this sort of inclination on one level or another, whether you want to label it as spiritual, which is just a word that I find to be a little bit nauseating at times in the way that it's thrown around. But so for that reason, I find it kind of hard to talk about, and I do my best. But I find yeah, everyone has that inclination, whether it's strictly through religion or a sense of whatever practice one chooses to honor. But these are all fundamental concerns in the very nature of existence. I mean, I didn't ask to be born here, and like, what am I doing here? And like, to not think about that is I don't see how you can't think about that.
Yeah, there's something else that's in my mind, if we have time for one more.
Yeah, go for it, Jason. We got a quick one from the chat here too.
Yeah.
So whichever order you like.
Let's go to the chat. Which one are you looking at?
So we have a question from Harris Fogel, and he says to John, since this project began when you were an undergrad student, albeit one older than your fellow students, did you find academia a help or hindrance?
Well, let's see. I found, I mean, it was both in a lot of ways. I found it to be incredibly helpful in so far as I've met a lot of teachers that were very important to me, was exposed to a lot of perspectives, and I've been able to form some very meaningful bonds with people, and Harris included in that group. So I mean, I think that is incredibly special. However, I have also found it to be a hindrance at certain times, because it took me a really long time to kind of work my way through the academic system and end up with a bachelor's. But I eventually did, but I mean, it was always a matter of being offered a show someplace, or something that I had to, an opportunity that I had to take, and the notion that school is always going to be there. So I was constantly kind of going in and out of it. I didn't always agree with the perspectives that people have, but that's just the nature of life, and of what you do. Like, no one's going to agree with you all the way. So in general, I mean, I think that my relationships with professors, and in the ability to engage with all of that, has been incredibly valuable.
Well, I think that, when we're kind of programmatically focused, as art teaching tends to be, I think we lose sight of an older lineage, which is exactly the kind of thing you mentioned when you spoke about your connection to Richard Kagan and his connection to his teacher. And there's this sort of, transmission almost of teacher to student to teacher to student in an apprentice-like fashion. This is a very, very ancient style of learning. And it might be that schools and universities and programs allow that to happen. Sometimes that doesn't happen in those programs. But there's, I think that when you speak of the lineage that you're part of, you didn't use that word, but this is the word that I heard. You think of yourself as part of an artistic lineage, and this is, may or may not have academic trappings, but the important part is the connection that you have to a teacher, I guess.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think whether it's found in an academic standpoint or in an apprenticeship type situation, I think that being a part of a lineage is incredibly valuable. However, the one thing that I will say is that it's something that you really have to go out and seek, and just simply showing up to class and following the curriculum is not exactly the best way to do that, but it does afford an ability to to be exposed to a lot of things. And I think that's important. And I think going back to school as an older student was much more appropriate, for me. And it's funny, Richard says that we can trace our lineage of teachers all the way back to Aaron Siskin, but I have not independently verified this, and I have no idea whether this is actually true. However, it's a fun thing to think about.
I have a friend who is putting together what he calls an educational genealogy of artists, in which he traces people who share the same teacher and those people who share the same teacher. So in this sense, I guess, my great-great-grandfather my own great-great-grandfather artistically is Walker Evans, because Walker Evans taught my teacher's teacher's teacher and so forth.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I love thinking about stuff like that, and I think it's important, and it's not only just a curiosity, but it inspires sort of a sense of responsibility to honor that.
Yeah. Michael, do we have time for one other question?
Yeah, we can do one more. That sounds great, Jason.
Okay, yeah, I have, John, I have a question about photography, more precisely in the way that your work is thinks about photography. A lot of the time, you mentioned at a certain point in your talk that the better word for what photographers do is making rather than taking. And And I think that that's very much the case. I also think that we tend to think of photography as an act that stops or freezes or captures or holds something captive. And most of all, what that thing is time.
Mhm.
And I think that your photographs, in a way, do the exact opposite. It's as if they turn the notion of capturing time on its head, and there's something that's released or let out, and or at the very least, it seems to me that you you perplex time, you create a perplexity out of the concept of time, because the images that you make don't clearly belong to instants or moments or nameable durations. They might just as well be epics. And I wonder if sort of making a puzzle out of photography's core conceits or core concepts is part of your mischief.
Well, I mean, I think photography and the way we think about this has gone through a lot of evolutions and transformations. I mean, when I mentioned someone like Siskin, Siskin would, if there happened to be a trash can in the photograph and he didn't want the trash can in the photograph, he'd contort himself into some sort of weird posture to kind of get it out of the frame or use a different lens or, that sort of thing. Jason, are you there?
Jason does look a little frozen there, John.
Yeah.
Oh, here he's back with us.
Okay. Anyway, so what I was saying is I feel like, photography and the notion of time has gone through a lot of transformations in the way we think about photography over the years. I mean, it used to be that a photograph was this sort of empirical document of truth that I was there, that this happened. I mean, you think about camera lucida and things like that, the sort of philosophies that were expressed in that writing. And that's really not something that interests me all that much because, as I was saying earlier, I'm not so inclined to go out and shoot landscape or to photograph moments or photojournalism or, this sort of thing. And, I just more am interested in using, the tools at my disposal, be it photography, be it music, be it, OLED screens, whatever the case may be, and, really create, create something that is, I mean, I think, and I hesitate to use the word timeless, but like, it's just not coming from that perspective when I'm in my thinking. It's simply a tool.
Jason, John, again, I wanted to thank you for such a great presentation tonight. Jason, thank you for the introduction and for leading the Q&A. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And please visit ACP Fest on your social media or acpinfo.org to find the festival guide and see all the other events and exhibitions that we have planned for the rest of the month. And thank you for your participation. Thanks again to Jason and the Emory University's Department of Film and Media. John, thank you again for sharing your work and your time tonight. And
thank you. It's a pleasure to do this.
Thank you both. That was a wonderful conversation. Great presentation, John.
And if the folks still tuning in, we're going to convert this and have it up on YouTube soon on ACP's channel there. So thanks again and take care. Good night.
Well, thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.